Hey, good morning. Can somebody just give me an audio check, please? All right, thank you. If you would please turn on your webcam so I can see you. That sure helps me a lot that I can see faces out there. There we go. Good morning. All right, maybe before we jump into my big plan that I have today, maybe I'll just check in and see if there's anything interesting going on with all of you. Anybody have a check-in that they might throw out there? It doesn't have to be related to the class.
I've got one.
Teresa.
Yeah. So Christina, who's also in this class and sitting over there.
Hi.
We just got foster kittens from the Cal Poly Cat program. So we have 2 6-month-old semi-feral kittens who we are attempting to socialize so that they can then be adopted. Right now they're under our beds, so I would show you them, but I can't because they're under our beds. But yeah, it's super exciting and fun.
Oh, that is cool. Well, that sounds like good fun, good thing to do when you spend a lot of time at home. Anybody else? Well, I'm not sure you all noticed last Wednesday, but I was doing a little data collection as I was dropping in each of the breakout rooms. And what I was trying to figure out is who cares about NBA basketball and who doesn't. And you would be really surprised. I gave everybody a chance to put themselves on a scale from 1 to 10 about how much they care about NBA playoffs. And I would say pretty sure all but 5 of you were a 6 or above, which was a little surprising to me. There was one that was a 0, and there was one that felt really bad that they didn't care more and they promised to care more, which is not what I was looking for. But anyway, so a 20-point blowout game or not, those aren't very interesting to me. But of course, there was another great game last night. So I just got to spend a couple minutes and show you the last play of the game last night. This was the Lakers and the Nuggets. And the situation is Denver is up by 1 point with 2.1 seconds left. So you figure they have the game won, right? It's going to be a desperation shot, probably not enough time to get a good open look. But if you'll watch Anthony Davis right here, who's the second best player in the world, right after LeBron James, who's right here. So the Lakers have the 2 best players in the world. Of course, we know who's going to win the NBA playoffs. But watch Anthony Davis right here, okay?
Denver a foul to give. Jokic trying to disrupt Rondo. He puts it in. Here's Davis, 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good! Anthony Davis has won it for the Lakers! Anthony Davis scored as a good 3-point basket. They will take a look, but Anthony Davis is going to send the Lakers to a 2-0 series lead. In the clutch, delivers the bomb.
Great defense by the Nuggets. Just outstanding offense.
by Anthony Davis.
All right, so you got to admit that's pretty exciting for not having to watch the whole game. We just get to watch the good part, right? So anyway, that was my check-in, as I thought that was a pretty fun game to watch, at least the last few seconds.
What the first time, like right when it happened, what was your physical reaction? Did you jump up, Professor?
I was sitting at the kitchen counter and I just yelled, "Yeah!" That was it. So anyway, for those of you, the 5 of you that are 5 or less on the scale, I apologize. You'll just have to entertain me a little bit when there's a great game. If it's a blowout game, we won't review it, I promise you. All right, how about any check-in or questions from the class? Anybody having issues? Anybody not getting help when they need it? Anything about the class?
I have a question actually. I posted it on the discussion board, but I'm not sure, and I did it like late last night. I didn't check this morning, so if it's answered, sorry. But it was about the challenges on the homework. So I know you mentioned for the first one we may not have to do it, but for this homework, I also did not do the challenge. And I'm just wondering, are we expected to do the challenge as part of the homework? And if so, or like, is it just if we basically to help us get more practice in, I guess?
It's that second one, Joey. It is, you'll notice the notebooks that I found. I found a resource for them and I'm using theirs and I'm adding a little bit of my own stuff, but those are kind of pre-scripted. And what I'd say is mostly it's for you to go through and learn. I think the challenges are good exercises, but for you to complete every single one of those challenges is not required. But you'll see today, for example, when we work on our lab, we're going to work on a notebook that I created, and there's 7 questions. And it's going to be really obvious the ones I want you to totally complete versus the ones that are referenced that are just for you to practice on. Is that clear enough, Joey?
That's perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, it's interesting. I did not get the discussion board post, so I'm going to investigate because I kind of wanted to know that you posted that, but I'm going to have to go investigate why I didn't get noticed. I'll figure that out because what I want is when somebody posts a question, I want to be able to see it immediately. So I'll go look at that.
Professor, I also had a question. So I know using Python in the past via like Anaconda and on the desktop, when you start typing something in, it'll give you suggestions on like what it needs. Is there a way to do that with the like Jupyter Notebook?
I think the answer is yes.
Okay.
I know for sure how to do it when we use the Pandas library. I'm sure that is, it's there for the native Python stuff. But Teresa, let me go investigate it so I can nail the answer. I'll probably give it to you at 11 o'clock today when I have a chance to go make sure I understand it, okay?
Okay, thanks.
I got a note here. Anybody else?
I had one question too. When I learned Java, we named a lot of our variables that had like multiple words. For example, it would be like the first word all lowercase and then the start of the second word would be capitalized. I noticed in the homework lesson, it said don't use capitalization and underscores instead. And I was wondering if there was a reason for that.
No, I think it's just personal preference. So, you know, for example, let me just type a little code here. I think the practices you're talking about are perfectly good. So for example, if you were gonna say, that would be a nice practice to use on variable names. So to start with a lowercase and then use an uppercase on the second word or the following words, I think that's a great practice. So there's no restrictions in Python when it comes to doing that. So continue your good practices there.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, so without any other questions, let's do this. Let's move to the muddiest points here. Again, I really appreciate when you all take the time to post, because I'm looking at those every class period, trying to figure out what's working and what needs improvement. So we had a little session where we were talking about Python takes some divisions, or it takes some numbers and it has trouble representing those in binary. And so we sometimes get all these trailing zeros where we wanted a round number and it gave us some decimal. And I just talked really quickly about it, but let me go back and talk a little bit deeper about this. The actual thing they highlighted in that notebook is not so important for us, but it gives us now a chance to talk a little bit about data types. So I've just got a little notebook going here, and if I do that first cell right there, and I say x equals 0.3, what's going to be the return from this command right here? I'm saying, tell me the data type of x. And does anybody have a guess on what that might be?
Is it like a float?
It's a floating point decimal, yeah. And in Python, they call that float. So that's not a surprise to anybody, right? Well, let's do the same thing. Let's define a y variable, and let's put 0.3, but let's put it in quotes. Does anybody have a guess on what the type of y is going to be?
Would it be a string?
A string?
Yeah, speak up.
Would it be a string?
It's a string, yeah. And just so you guys know, when I ask a question and then I sit there and look at the camera, you can count on me waiting until somebody says something. So don't think I'm going to answer my own question when I do that. Okay, so is there any question at all? Like, they're both 0.3, right? But they're different data types. And it turns out understanding data types is not only in Python, but in any programming language is a pretty important thing. And that'll come up a lot. Okay, so there's a difference between a string. A string can be something like characters too, right? We can do that. And that's a string. Okay, there's a difference between a string, an integer, a floating point. Even though they may have the same values, right? The thing that really differentiates a string is the quotes. And here's that strange output that Python does. And this is just kind of something we have to live with because of how computers work. Okay? So how about when I do that, let me ask you, what's the data type of that right there?
Float?
It's still a float. Good call. Yep. How about if I use the round function and I take that value z and I round it, and I will tell you that the round function, the second argument that you pass to it is the number of decimal places. So if I do that right there, what do you think the type is now?
Still float.
Still a float. Good call. Okay, no problem. And that's an awesome command, right? Because anytime we get a variable, we can really quickly just see what type it is. But here's kind of a fun thing. So I took that float that's in the a variable, and I gave it a a function called str, and I assign the return from that function to a variable called s, and then I figured out the type of s. What is the type of s? Any predictions on what this is going to be?
A string?
Yep, good call. It's a string, right? And you can see that the string is in quotes 0.3. So hopefully that explains a little bit about we're able to change variables to different types if we want to. There are many commands that do this kind of thing. Like say we had a string and we wanted to convert it to a float, or we wanted to round it, or we had a, yeah, we can cast, the right verb is cast. You can cast a variable to a different type if you want to.
Professor, if you try to turn a non-decimal string to a float, will it send back an error?
A non-decimal string.
So if you tried to convert like dog to float.
Oh yeah, let's see. So the great thing about working with software is you can't actually break anything, right? Okay, so we have Rover, we can just try it. So what you want to do is you want to float dog, right? That's what you want to do?
Yes.
Any predictions?
An error.
Yeah, I think so too. I've never done it. Let's see what happens. All right. So I encourage you to totally do stuff like that to get more familiar. We could probably do something like if we were going to try to encrypt or represent Rover as a float or as a number, we could probably convert each of those characters to its ASCII decimal value. If you don't know what ASCII is, it's a way to represent, it's the way that letters are represented by numbers inside the computer. We could convert these to the ASCII equivalents. We could store that as a number, and if we wanted Rover back, we would have to reconvert it from the number to the character. So you could do stuff like that. That just seems like not really useful for what we're going to do, but it's possible. Any questions about any of those kinds of things? So hopefully you're starting to get an idea for we are storing values in variables. We're starting to pay attention to the type of the variable. And we can even change the variable type in certain situations. All right. One of the muddiest points was how to create the header in Jupyter Notebooks. And I'm sure there are more efficient ways, but the way I showed is I'm just going to insert one up here. And the first thing you do is you change the cell type from code to markdown. And then when you type in here, that just ends up being text, right? And if I wanted to adjust that text, I think there's more ways to do this than just using HTML tags. So if you've never used HTML tags, the format they are is they have an opening bracket, and then depending on what you want to do, H1 is a header tag, and H1 is the biggest header. So I think you can do that right there, and that becomes a large header. That takes just a little bit of knowledge of HTML tags, which are, that's about as much as I know, not a whole lot. All right, so hopefully that addresses that. Any questions? think there's a way to do that with just using, I think they have something like pound signs. Does anybody know the syntax of this? No, that's not it. I think there's another way to code that. I'll have to look it up and give you help on that. Nobody knows the code you use for
Hey, Kurt.
Yep.
I think in Jupyter Notebook, it's a pound sign before. And then the more pound signs you put, the smaller it gets.
Ah, there it is right there. You see it? So good old Google to the rescue. There it is right there. So the equivalent of the header is to put just a pound sign. And if I want it a little smaller, I put another pound sign. And if I want it even smaller, I just keep adding pound signs. So that's a quick way to make headers. This was a good question. I have never done this. I never even thought about doing it, but it said, I know there's a way to make graphs look good in Excel, but after you do all that work and you tweak them and you get them just right, how do you save them? How do you save the characteristics so that the next time you go to make a similar graph, you can just use that template? And of course, good old Google to the rescue. It is totally possible. You just highlight it and you say, make a template out of it. So you get the graph all dialed in, you make a template, and then you can apply that template in the future. So that's good to know. I did not know you could do that. Good questions. Anything else from Muddiest Points?
Professor, I have a question about the homework, if I'm able to ask that now.
I'm having a hard time hearing you. Just speak up.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I had a question about the homework, if I'm able to ask that now.
Why don't you ask it, and I may answer it later. So go ahead. Do you want to share your screen, or you want me to open up the homework?
I can share my screen.
All right, you're cleared.
Are you able to see it?
Yep, looks great.
So my question is, when I was going through the part that's kind of the lecture, it explained how to use the list function, but when I run it, I get an error, and I'm not sure if it's because of the version of Python that I'm using. But this is like their code that they gave, and it just doesn't run. I'm not sure if anyone knows how to resolve this.
I am looking at it, Jasmine. Is anybody able to see? There's something with the
I got a similar error to that.
Did you fix
it? And I think it was because, yeah, I restarted the kernel because I think that the range might have been like defined earlier as something else. So then they can't call it as that function or method. So at the top, you can reset the kernel and rerun all the code that you have written. You could try that. Oh wait, not that one. That one might work too, but we go back to that.
Which one?
Restart and run all is what fixed mine.
So many.
You can do a Control F for search and range. There it is right there. I was there.
Yeah, it didn't seem to work.
Now your error is list instead of range, though. That's kind of weird.
I can try to change the range maybe.
So Jasmine, I made a note of it here. Let me go investigate it, and we'll try to talk about it after after a bit. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up. Did anybody else encounter the same thing, or they all got by it? Everybody got by it?
Jazz, I had a similar error, if not the exact same error, and this sounds kind of not a very technical solution, but I think I just closed, I think I just closed Jupyter Notebooks and just closed my Anaconda server and everything and opened it back up and it ran perfectly fine. I don't know if you've tried that already, but that's what happened to me.
I'll try that right now. Thank you.
All right, so it may be something gets corrupted along the way. Okay. All right, keep moving. Okay, so what I'm getting ready to do is launch a quiz for you, but before we do that, I just want to review really quick. I want to talk a little bit more about the term project because we're trying to get ramped up so that we have the project ready to go in week 8. So remember, your options are to just take the course content and do a 30-hour project the last 4 weeks. That's one option. The other option is to take some kind of additional training and then do a smaller 10-hour project with that tool that you learned to do. Okay, so those are the options, and hopefully you've thought a little bit about that. We're going to ask you today what your preference is, and you don't have to commit right now. We're just trying to gather a little data so we know we don't waste our time preparing something that nobody's going to take the option. Okay, so just that little bit of info before we take this quiz. So if you'll open up Canvas, and you'll notice that we're now in week 2, and week 2 appeared above week 1. So the new content will be under top block and above last week. So here we are in week 2. If you'll just open up this synchronous quiz, get ready to go. Remember, put in your username, and that'll launch you into it. And I will launch that quiz on my end, and then you'll be able to see the first question.
Sorry, what's the student ID? It's your Cal Poly username, right? What your email is?
Yeah, it's your username before the @calpoly.edu, just your username. So mine is K Colvin.
Mine is not working.
Mine is also not working.
Mine is,
Yeah, me too.
Mine is also not working.
Really?
You have to do all caps, I think.
I think it should be all caps. Let's see. So watch my screen for a minute. So if I do this right here, and then I type in K Colvin, if I spell it right, and then submit. Does that work for you all?
Nope.
it says, please try your student ID, or please check your student ID and try again.
All right, maybe if everybody gets out of it right now, let me just try again. It worked last week, huh? Please try again.
I don't know if this is the same quiz, but I was able to get into the reoccurring quiz that's like on the top in the top block, but I wasn't able to get into the one that was specifically for today.
Thanks. Maybe I made a mistake on that. So yeah, let me do this really quick. So if you'll go to the top block and do the recurring quiz right there. Top block of Canvas, recurring quiz. Click on that link and put in your username.
That works.
Mine still doesn't work. I think I just added the class too, so that might be a problem.
Okay. I don't see it showing up here, so maybe we're gonna bail out on this right now. Oh no, here we go. Looks like people are. So if you don't have a user, we can work that out later, but it looks like many of you are on now.
Yeah, but we clicked the link up top, I think, the reoccurring quiz, and then it let us in.
Okay.
Versus your specific link to quiz 2.
Okay, it looks like 28 of you are on, so that's going to be good data for us. So let's do this quickly. So question 1, please complete that if you're on. It looks like 28 of you are. Okay, 10 seconds. Okay. Wow, that's a little bit unexpected for me. So those of you that spent more than 2 hours on it, would you just talk a little bit? Maybe tell me how long and what took you so long, or tell me about how it's going. Is it just too much content, or it's because you're so new to Python? Just give me a little feedback, please.
I'll jump in. I was definitely one of the more than 2 hour crew. I thought it was like super well laid out and really, really helpful compared to my last coding class. Like it was so easy to learn, which felt really good. Like it felt like I was making a lot of progress. So I was really happy about that. It was just, there was a lot like it just took a long time because for me at least, there was a lot to do. But it was also like, I was almost okay with it just because like, I really do feel like I was learning a ton. But I guess overall, I would just say like, I don't know. I think maybe just as it'll get faster as we get more practice. And I was definitely going a lot faster, like the second half, even though it was hard material, I was going a lot faster the second half than I was the first half, I think. So that's good.
That's good. Thanks, Joe. Anybody else jump in there?
For me, the second half actually took me longer than the first half. I felt like it went kind of quick at the beginning. And then the exercises got like a little bit harder. So I think the exercises that were a little bit tougher were what took me like a little bit more time, but also I did really like it. Like I did feel like I was learning. And it was nice because you can just like scroll back up and see their example code and stuff. So, but it did like take me quite a while to do it. So.
Yeah, and I would also add on to that, at least for me personally, it just felt like in order to stay focused on it, I had to do it for a little while and then stop and then come back to it, that it wasn't really the type of thing that I could do just, you know, from start to finish, just because it was so long.
Okay. Well, I'd say my goal is to get it in C. Like some of you are going to be much faster, but my goal is to get it kind of between 1 to 2 hours outside of class. So that's what I'm shooting for. Maybe as we get going in the programming more and you get some more experience, that'll come down a little bit. But thanks for the feedback. I'm going to try to keep it in the 1 to 2 hours. So thanks for that. Let's go to the next question. It's open now. Ten seconds. All right. Yep. So the part I blocked out from that document right there, that graphic, it says in a live presentation, you have a lot of control about the audience and what you say and reacting to feedback you get from the audience. But in a written report, you need to add a lot of detail. So not as much detail in the presentation, but in a written document, you kind of got to give all the detail, all the supporting evidence, all the data is likely in the appendix somewhere. So the correct answer is A, control in a presentation, but detail in a written document. Any questions about that? Okay, next question. Ten seconds. All right, so it looks like lots of concern over programming and then project work. Okay, thanks for that. Okay, question number 4 is open.
So professor, is option C just failing the class?
It is not. It's 30%. So what I would say is if you nail the midterm and you get a 90% or better on the midterm, you could just take a C. No problem. Kind of like taking the class credit, no credit. You could put your effort up front and you could take the last 4 weeks off. Ah, okay, interesting. So 2/3 of you are going to take some additional training. All right. Okay, so this last question is about those of you that answered B right here. So if you answered B, then you're going to answer this question right here. So that question 5 is open.
If we don't know yet, should we just like go for a random?
Yeah, why don't you just, whatever seems like the right thing right now, with full confidence you can change your mind later. Hi, Heather, are you there today?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right, good. So let's just take 15 more seconds to make a choice. Five seconds. All right, so that's helpful. So I would imagine some of you are not quite sure what all those options are. Heather, would you be willing to talk about the Microsoft, the Power BI, and the Power Apps, and a little bit about an introduction to what those are and what you've got in terms of training planned?
Yeah, so the Power App product, if you didn't take Audrey Stella's class, you probably didn't have an introduction to this because it's, I think, genuinely pretty new. Power BI is Power Business Intelligence, so it's making interactive dashboards with your data. The Microsoft product, so companies that, I think a lot of consulting companies use it because Microsoft is a pretty widely used service, and so it's transferable between those companies. It's pretty straightforward to do manipulations in it and make your visualizations in it compared to Python, especially. Like it's much easier than, you know, making a histogram in Matplotlib versus making a histogram in Power BI is very different. It's a lot more user-centered. And then Power Apps is making apps like phone apps or tablet apps that people can use on like the manufacturing floor within the company to collect data, record information. And that's also can be linked to your Power BI dashboards. And so the two work pretty well together. Audrey Stella, she was a past grad student, taught a course in that kind of combined as an introduction to both. And she learned a lot of it from Disney. They use a lot of it in the parks, apparently. All the employees will have like certain apps on their phone to take different data collections and it's put into the Power BI dashboards. At my future job, we're going to use Power BI a lot because, again, it's pretty transferable. Microsoft is used in a lot of companies. And then Tableau is another visualization software. From what I've seen, that's used more when you're working for a company and your visuals stay within the company and it's not as shared, but also a more like user-centered, straightforward application. And there's a bunch of stuff online for both, especially with COVID, that both companies have put forth a lot more online training. And so for the Tableau and Power BI 20-hour courses, it's actually the same as the prep course for the certification for those applications. So if you were to do that 20-hour training, you're then kind of prepared to take the certification in that. So that's another incentive to do those. And Power Apps will probably be very similar, at least, I'm hoping.
All right, thank you. So let me just explain to you, so the two Power Apps and AWS Honeycode, those are called low code, no code application development. So they're a way to develop phone and tablet and PC applications that don't take much coding. It's all graphical selection. And what those are really good for industrial engineers is they're really good for data acquisition. So it's a way to put an application in an employee's hand, and it's very easy for them to interact with data. So usually adding information into a database is what they do. So those two are kind of equivalent. You kind of have to make the decision, do I want to go with Microsoft products or do I want to go with AWS, Amazon Web Services? So I don't think it really matters, whatever interests you more. And I think Heather did a great job. Tableau and Power BI are very similar. Do you go with Microsoft or the one that's not Microsoft? I'm not sure. The last one down there is cloud computing. And I'll have to give you a separate little 10-minute introduction to what that might be, but this is technology that's been around for about 10 years, and it's starting to gain a lot of play, a lot of application. It looks like one or two of you picked F, and I was wondering if one or two of you would just mention what is it you have in mind to do for that one. I'm just curious. Apparently it's a secret, no problem. We'll get to that later. Okay, so it's good to know. It looks like the bulk of you are going to be up here in the dashboard software. So sounds good. Let me finish that. So Heather, I will make sure I get that info to you, and we'll have a little conversation this week about what to do with prep on that. Sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, thanks for coming today.
Thanks for having me.
All right. It looks like our code teacher, Darren Craker, is finally online. Darren, thanks for coming the second week of class.
My pleasure.
Darren, if you wouldn't mind, would you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure, I'll make it quick. So I've been a software developer for 25 years. I've worked at Boeing, I've worked at Starbucks, and I've worked at Cal Poly for the last 20. I currently work over at the DX Hub, where we are a partnership between Amazon Web Services and Cal Poly, and we basically tackle public sector challenges, and we build lean prototypes to demonstrate to the client that there's a nifty solution that we can build in the cloud. So I got introduced basically to Kurt 2 or 3 years ago, and he's been nice enough to pull me into the classroom with him. I really enjoy working with students and teaching, so I'm delighted and privileged to be here. So thanks for involving me, Kurt.
Yep, and I think it's going to work out that next quarter, Darren's going to take one of the lab sections. We're going to have 2 lab sections next quarter in 212, and I think Darren's going to teach one of those. And just realize that everything that is in this class, it really is a product of Darren and I together. Remember, Darren comes with a really broad technology and programming background. I come from the IE side. And so together, we're trying to put together the right balance. One other thing I'll say is that this is definitely stereotyping computer programmers, but often what you'll find is people that are in programming positions, I'll just say they're not the best at communicating. And so sometimes it's the role of the IE to kind of translate between management and what they want and the needs of the software developer. So sometimes that's a good role for industrial engineers to play, is to translate between upper management and the technical people working on that. Luckily, Darren is not one of those type of programmers, right? He communicates really well, but you may all encounter sometime in your career a very technical person that doesn't necessarily communicate very effectively. Any questions or comments? Okay, we are almost to transitioning into lab 3, but just before we do that, I wanted to, I put a page on Canvas that I call Lecture 2A. So if you'll just quickly open up Lecture 2A. And there was just a couple of points I wanted to pull out of the reading and see if you had any questions about it. So we'll just quickly go down the list here. But this was the chapter that talked about context and understanding your context. And they introduce kind of an example here, a working example that they'll revisit a few times through the book. And that's about a 4th grade science teacher who does a program, collects some data, and then is going to report back on that data. And they identify several different constituents for the audience. And in the end, in this example, they come up with the intended audience of the presentation is the people funding the program. So the point is that you would design your presentation very specifically depending on who the audience is. Another thing they emphasize in this chapter is that every presentation, every business presentation should absolutely have a point or a reason or a call to action. If you can't quite identify what the reason for this presentation is, it may be time to reconsider giving that presentation. So make sure you fully understand and articulate what the point or the purpose or the reason for the presentation is. And I'm hoping you all will think back last week to my little story about the increase in the number of Olympic medals. I wonder if you all remember my call to action. Would anybody be able to remember that?
I think it was something like to help reduce the amount of medals, total medals that were given out.
Yeah, I actually used a little bit stronger language in that. I said, join me in the fight to reduce the number of medals. So that was my kind of embellished call to action. So yeah, that would be an example of having the audience promise or engage or get them to agree to do something. So that's part of the story also. Okay, the next point I wanted to make sure is you understood some of the context questions. So these are just questions to help you get to what the context is. And sometimes this is pretty effective. These last two right here is kind of visualizing what a successful outcome would be. And another technique is to boil down your entire presentation to a single sentence. And that's what they call the big idea. The big idea from my presentation is, I think the increase number in Olympic medals reduces their value. Please join me in reducing those. So that would be an example of the big idea, without all of the detail or the data. Okay, so then they talk about the 3-minute story. So that's kind of the first attempt that you take your presentation. If you just had an elevator speech to communicate, what would that look like? And the big idea is all the way down to 1 sentence. So the idea behind those, you know, if it's an important presentation and it's really important to you to effectively communicate the information or the point or the data, it's helpful sometimes to maybe start with the big picture. I mean, start with the entire presentation, boil it down to a 3-minute story, boil it down to a big idea, or maybe you'll go the other way. Maybe you'll start with the big idea, go to the 3-minute story, go to the full presentation. So that's what she's trying to convey, is moving between those level of detail sometimes helps you really refine your message. One other thing they talk about there towards the end of the chapter is storyboarding. And so there's a little 6-minute tutorial that talks about effective ways to storyboard. And that may be an important technique also. So that's kind of the content I wanted to make sure you got out of that chapter 1. Any questions or comments? Hey, Darren, can I call on you cold? Would you be willing to tell any stories or lessons or examples of those kinds of presentation advice?
Yeah, I can think of one example. So I had to give a presentation to a group of individuals about our process on how we innovate and how we, solve these public sector challenges. And so lucky for me, I invited Kurt to join us. So we had to give a presentation to the Family Care Network on, what is working backwards? What does design thinking really mean? And so it was, that the framework that Kurt just presented, I was referring back to that process that we went through to who is our audience, and then, picking relevant examples. And so, this was a group we've never spoken to, a group we'll never speak to again. It was kind of our one chance. We were asked by the CIO or CEO of the company to come explain this process to us because the company themselves wanted to use this process for their strategic project, strategic planning sort of for the year annual planning. And so luckily I had Kurt help me do this. So we delivered a presentation to them, and a lot of the things Kurt mentioned, we followed, and it was pretty successful given that we just had one shot. So that's my story.
Anybody else have really good examples of using some of those techniques in a presentation, or maybe even being in the audience and witnessing some of those?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think like one interesting one in there was like tone, and especially that you wanted us to include tone in our response. A few weeks ago, actually, I was not reporting out, but doing a progress report for my internship. And it was actually really important, the tone of it, because basically I was telling my boss that the issue with material flow and storage in the facility had to do, like the root cause had to do with leadership and communication, which is part of her job. And she's awesome, but it was, you know, something that I was a little nervous about. I didn't want it to just sound like, you know, blaming or whatever, but it was like the issue. And she responded great, but I think it was really important that I like definitely had like, the tone was not condescending, but sincere and serious at the same time. So, but then also with humor in there, like just bringing in certain aspects to also keep it light. But I more just like there was a lot of different, I guess, tone that was important to get that across effectively. And so that was, I think that's interesting because I didn't realize, I just kind of took that for a given, but I realized like tone is really important, not just the words you're using. So.
Yeah, so when you're talking to a superior and the message is you're the problem, how do you effectively communicate that without, you know, hurting their feelings or pissing them off or making them defensive? So congratulations if you pulled that off, Joey.
Thanks.
All right, so unless there's any other questions, we're going to kind of move on and hit the lab for today. We ready to go? Okay, if you'll go to Canvas and open up Lab 3, that's inside of week 2. And there's 2 parts. The first part is to go back and look at your context that you used from the last homework. And by the way, when I read through those, I was amazed at how many of you still had internships this summer. I thought everybody was fired or not hired. So I'm super pleased to see so many of you had internships. Another thing that was really great is almost none of you used school assignments as the presentation you talked about. So great job on that too. So go back and look and reread your post. And then from that, I want you to create the big idea sentence. So that's based on the reading from chapter 1 in Storytelling with Data. And I want you to create your big idea sentence. So go back and look at the reading and make sure you comply with what she's suggesting. So that's the first task. Okay, then the second task is we're going to now get to some more challenging programming. So based on what we did over the weekend, please download Lab 3 Task 2 notebook. And I'll just pull that up really quick here. Stand by, just to make sure you understand it.
Oh, also, Professor, I have one more question.
Yeah, please.
So I know you said the Wednesday labs, technically, like, yes, great to get them done by the end of lab, but also you have until Saturday to turn them in, is I think what it said. But is that for Monday? Would it then be like for if they're due Wednesday, or are they just due at 11 a.m.?
Yeah, my goal is to get the labs done in class and the homework done outside of class.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so this is a little bit more challenging than the notebooks you've been working with. So these are just problems I want you to solve. Okay, so your code kind of goes where you're prompted right there. So I give you the question and then you respond with your code. And what I want you to do, of course, is in the breakout rooms, I want you to team code. I want you to bounce ideas off each other. Hopefully you can get some synergy going in your breakout room there. But then Darren and I are going to be in the main room waiting for questions, and then we're going to drop in too. So be ready for that. But it's a little bit more challenging, especially when you get down to number 7. Number 7, I would say, is on the upper end of challenge. If you haven't had even if you have had some Python before, it's going to take a pretty good understanding of loops and lists and things like that to pull off number 7. So we kind of call that the challenge. I would say if you try for a half hour and you are not making progress anymore, it's probably a good idea to stop and wait for a little help. But for sure, you should be through number 6 and be working on number 7, I hope, by 11 o'clock today.
If we can't get through.
Go ahead, one at a time.
For task 1, can you open up the big ideas discussion? Because right now it doesn't give us permission.
Okay, let me fix that really quick.
Thank you.
So I think I need you to go to discussions.
While he's fixing that, Joey, did you have a question?
Yeah. Do you want us to wait to turn in if we can't get number 7, should we wait to turn in the lab, or should we just turn it in up to 6 if we're unable to figure out 7?
We talked about 7 could be potentially a homework problem, or I wouldn't worry about not turning it in. If you get through 6, just turn it in. 7 we kind of listed as and it's my fault. 7 was my problem. I thought it was interesting, but it is a bit challenging. So I would say if you finish through 6, turn it in.
Okay, thank you so much.
Kurt, did you agree with that?
Sounds good. Anything else? Okay. We will, we'll see you in your breakout room, and then we'll see you again at 11. Any questions before we go? All right, here we go. All right, we about ready to get going again. I love it when your webcams are on so I can see you. All right, so what I wanted to do was I wanted to open up the solution and walk through and give people a chance to ask questions or clarify anything. if you want the solution, I've posted that on Canvas, so you can find my solution. Let me just show you where it is here. So if you want to download my notebook, it's right under lab 3 there. So there's my solution. I've got it open right here, and I thought I would just go down through probably the lower ones where we had kind of the questions. So the first thing is, a few of you were confused. You thought I wanted you to read in the CSV file, and we're going to start a little slower than that. We'll get to that really soon, but I just wanted you to create a list of lists. So that was just, you'd work with a few simple lists, and I just wanted you to make a list of 2 lists. So you can do that just by hand, copy and paste, and you had to do a few tricks, like you had to put in brackets and you had to put in quotes. But once you got it, then we had some data to work with. Any questions about that cell right there? So then it seemed like most of you figured out ways to do things like pull out certain elements from each of the list. So I just used an index here. And as we look across some of your codes, sometimes you do things in different ways. And if you understand and you get it to work, that's totally fine. In fact, sometimes I think Darren and I learn a lot by looking at ways you do things. So that seemed to go okay. There was a few questions, like if you wanted to use 2 indices. So this one says use the second list in the list of lists, right? It's index 0 is the first one, 1 is the second one, and then give me the 10th element. So that's an example of using the list indices to pull out what you wanted to. And some of you did that a different way, which is fine. Number 6 requires you to use a structure we haven't explicitly talked about, but if you've taken any programming before, you've done an if statement. So this is an if statement that's looking through each list, and it's looking that the 11th element is equal to my variable city2. So I'm testing, look through each row, and if that 11th element is equal to my variable city2, then do something. Otherwise, don't do anything. Any questions about any of that? Okay, the last one, where we give you a few rows to work with, and this is just a few rows, right? We're going to work with hundreds of thousands of rows really soon. So this is just kind of getting warmed up. But we're using a data structure now that's a list of lists, and we're kind of working through that. And so one way to do this is to just set up a couple counters, right? I want you to pull out the number of males and females. So set up a couple of variables. And then you can see from my comments right there, what are we doing with that last ID number right there? Who could verbalize what the use of that variable is?
It's a way of identifying a unique athlete, like you said. So basically, what it's doing is it's checking if the row that you're currently on matches the ID of the previous row, and if it does, then it does it. So if it's a unique person, then it'll add to the count. But if it's not a unique person, then it will not add to the count.
Right, so exactly. I'm trying to decipher between, is this a repeat row, a repeat person or not? And so a little inspection of the data, you can see that Christine is ID number 5. It's the first element in that list, right? So I start off with 0, so we know there's no zeros. So the first one's a 1. So start with 0. First, if 0 is not equal to row 0, right? So I'm saying if 0 is not equal to that number right there, and I hope you're familiar with the not equal to operator. If those two things are not the same, then we're going to do something, right? And that thing we're going to do is we're first going to update. We're going to say, all right, take the 1 and assign it to last ID so that the next time through, I can check again and identify if this is a duplicate or not. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to say, look at the male-female element. And if it's a male, increase the males by 1. Otherwise, we know it's a female, increase the females by 1. Okay, so that whole thing right there kind of does the heavy lifting of this. And then at the end, I just print out the results. And by the way, I'm not taking credit. This was Darren's problem. So Darren, you get full credit.
I guess I'm just curious if Kurt and I debated, I told some of you this, that this problem was a good stretch problem. I guess, can I show, like, maybe you can give me hands on the, either in the camera or not. Was this thumbs up? Kurt's favorite is thumbs up. This was a fair problem. Thumbs down, this was too hard, or thumbs in the middle, this was, I'm not sure.
Just on their cameras, huh?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so no thumbs down, a few thumbs sideways. Okay. Good, thanks.
Again, some of you did different things, used different functions, which is totally fine. No problem at all. Anything to talk about with that notebook before we move on? Okay, just following up from a couple things from this morning earlier. I can't remember who asked it, but there was a question about how to get help from the functions inside of Jupyter Notebooks. And the key is the Shift tab. And you can press Shift tab up to 4 times. So you can see I've started a function here, and with the cursor in between the brackets in Notebooks, if you hit Shift tab, the first Shift tab just gives you the short help. The second Shift tab, it gives you the full help at the cursor there. So that's 2 times. The third time, it leaves that help up there while you start to type in your code. And then the fourth time, it puts the help down at the bottom. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and it leaves it up there at the bottom until you close that. So Shift Tab is the key to getting help with that. And that works on, I think it's any function, anytime, anything in native Python does that. And I'm sure that all the libraries we use, they're going to comply with that help too. So I think that'll always be there for you. If you need help with a function, use the Shift tab. Jasmine, let me ask you, I went and I had never really used range much, but I kind of investigated and understand how it works now. Were you able to get past your problem in your notebook?
Yeah, I just kind of refreshed it and it was working.
Okay, great. Hey, the last thing is, I just want to remind you, back in week 1, I put up a link to the Think Python textbook. And Darren and I agree that this is a pretty fantastic Python notebook, textbook. It's got a lot of examples in there. It's got anything we do in this course. This will cover the Python we're going to use. So you might think about using that. If you get stuck, use that as a bit of a reference for Python. It's pretty good. All right. I think that is all I have. Darren, anything to add?
Oh, good job on the Python stuff today, guys.
Any questions at all before we move on? Okay, so when we end class today, I'll remind you to go off and do the Muddiest Point survey. It's up there kind of in sequence on week 2. So then the last thing today is just to introduce homework 3. And then we're out of here and you all can go work on this. So this one is all about functions. So I would imagine if you've taken a Python class, you've created some functions. We're going to use a whole lot of functions this quarter. So I think this is a valuable review of how functions are created. It's not that we're going to create so many functions, we're just going to use a lot of functions. And so it's pretty important to understand about how functions deal with arguments. And when I say arguments, what I mean is this right here. So here's the function round, and it takes 2 arguments, the number and then the number of decimal places, right? And it's important that you're able to read the help, understand what a function is expecting, and then be able to execute that function. So that's going to happen a lot. We're going to use these libraries. They're going to have all these functions, and you're going to have to understand how arguments work. The other thing that's important to understand is how to deal with what a function sends back. So I'm going to use a variable name here. Right, I'm going to store the return value of this into that variable right there. So it's important you understand what a function returns to you. So that's what I mean by the return value. And if I were to ask you, what's the type of this, you would know how to do that. So in the future, we're going to get things back that are things like a series, a data frame, a tuple, a complex data structure. We're going to get a whole lot of things back from functions, and it's important you understand what am I getting returned and what's inside of it. So that's what I want you to do this this homework number 3 is making sure you understand about arguments we pass to a function, and then how to deal with return values. That's the important part of this assignment. Any questions about that? Just checking my notes here to see if I forgot anything. Okay, so I'm going to go pretty light on this homework assignment. You have still 45 minutes before the end of class, but this is all that's due before class on Wednesday morning. We'll probably be a little bit heavier on the homework that's assigned between Wednesday and next Monday. So expect a little bit heavier assignment then. Hey, Darren, would you be willing to talk about one of the best projects that you're currently working on out there at the DX Hub? What's one of the neat things you have going right now?
Yeah, happy to. The scooter one's gotten a lot of press lately. I actually had an interview with Washington Post on Friday. You want to talk about that one or a new one?
Yeah, while you talk about it, maybe I'll pull up the post from it.
The scooter one?
Yeah.
So the DX Hub, again, we invite public sector entities to submit challenges to us. We use the Amazon methodology to sort out and come up with very similar to what you guys just discussed, that idea, the big idea. The workshop we have at the beginning is called an innovation workshop that leads us to a big idea as a group. And then the second part of the solution is where I get involved and we build a prototype. And so this prototype involved, we have the city of Santa Monica come to us and say, hey, we're doing a pilot right now with 4 different scooter vendors. And, you know, through policing and education, we've tried to get the operators of the scooters to stay off the sidewalks and on the streets, but they, in certain areas, still get on the sidewalks and we're getting complaints from pedestrians. Can you do anything? And so we started looking at possible technical solutions, which included GPS, that new dual band GPS that was supposed to have 12 inches, so 1 foot resolution. So we thought, okay, we can figure out where the scooter is if using this GPS. And then if it got too close to a sidewalk, we could disable the scooter. We tested that. We bought the chip and we rode it around the DX Hub, which is located out by the chicken unit at Cal Poly. And every time we got near the building, we would get diffraction and the GPS signal would get off. It would go up to 10 feet of error. So that was obviously not good enough for sidewalks. So we, working with another student that was interning with us that summer, he came up with this idea to use the phone also has a accelerometer, right? So when you do your steps or when you walk around, your phone tells you did this many steps in a day. That same chip we decided could be used to classify the type of sidewalk or classify the surface, right? The asphalt is sort of rough and has lots of bumps. The sidewalk is smoother than the asphalt, but has the difference is has periodic gaps. You guys have all walked on the sidewalk and seen those cracks between each slab. The IMU or the accelerometer was used we basically pulled the data right out of that sensor, and then using Python, we ran a filter on the data set that came out and noticed very characteristic spikes, periodic spikes on the sidewalk as opposed to sort of random noise on the asphalt. So using that data, we were able to take an Arduino and power the scooter off if it sensed periodic spikes. So we built this little prototype out of this. We went to Walmart, bought a $100 scooter, put it together, and it worked. And we went down to the city of Santa Monica, and we spoke to the city manager, the CIO, and we had all the scooter vendors present, and we presented this idea to them, saying for less than $1, you can go buy this IMU chip, and all the other hardware needed is already on your scooter platform. You got battery, you got all this other stuff. So there's no reason you cannot implement this sort of feature on a scooter. And so that was a way for the DX Hub and the city of Santa Monica to prove to vendors, hey, there is an inexpensive technological solution out there. And we even got the city manager after the meeting out on the sidewalk, and she got on her little scooter, and she, sure enough, hit a few bumps, and the scooter powered down. So if we ever go back to in-person stuff, you guys are near the hub, you guys can take the scooter for a spin and try to ride it on the sidewalk or ride it on the asphalt. So that was a pretty cool one. And it needed Python, Kurt.
Yeah, you wrote Python for it?
Yeah.
Cool. All right, anything else for today? All right, I think Darren and I are gonna hang out for a few minutes. So if you have things to talk about, we'll be here. But otherwise, I will see you on Wednesday morning. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks, Professor.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you put up the notes on the tab function again really quick?
Oh, sure.
Thank you.
Sure.
That was the other. I just noticed you posted the wrong link, but that's okay. That's another project we did for the.
Oh, I posted the wrong link? Sorry.
There's two. One was the machine learning of how to count them, and the other one was the.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I guess this is more for Kurt because I just added the class, and I was wondering if there's like any. I watched both the lectures that you recorded from the first two lectures. I was wondering if there's anything else I need to do besides like looking over and reviewing that first homework. I did some of the homework problems, but I was wondering if there's anything else I need to do besides that.
Nope. It sounds like you're figuring out how to get caught up. So Jacob, it sounds like I need to create a Socrative quiz user for you, huh?
Yeah.
Jacob, what's your Cal Poly user ID?
It's JANDREAT.
Okay. I'll have that ready to go for you.
Sweet. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Hey, Astrid, anything else?
No, I was just sorry, can you hear me? I had issues with the mic.
Yeah.
I was just staying on to start the homework, and then I was thinking I could ask questions.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.